Alright folks, gather round, let's talk about the hottest real estate market that nobody wants to buy into Ukraine. Ukraine's wrestled back 54% of the territory Russia initially gobbled up. That's right, more than half. The situation's about as stable as a Jenga tower built by a caffeinated squirrel. Ukraine's opened a fresh front in Kharkiv. Buckle up, buttercups, because this roller coaster ride is far from over. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the current kerfuffle, let's rewind a bit, shall we? It's 2014, Gangnam Style is still stuck in our heads, and Vladimir Putin's rocking a dad bod and some serious expansionist ambitions. He decides Crimea, a sunny little peninsula belonging to Ukraine, looks awfully appealing. So what does he do? He pulls a borrow your pen and never return it move and annexes Crimea, just like that. Now you'd think the international community would have thrown a hissy fit, right? Well, there were some strongly worded letters and a few sanctions that wouldn't even make Putin spill his afternoon vodka. But for the most part, it was back to business as usual. Little did we know this was just the trailer for the geopolitical blockbuster that was about to hit theaters in 2022. It's like watching the prequel after you've seen the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy. You know it's important, but you just want to get to the good stuff already. Fast forward to February 2022. Putin, perhaps feeling nostalgic for the good old days of Cold War tensions, decides it's time for a sequel. Only this time it's not just a peninsula he's after, it's the whole enchilada. He launches what he calls a special military operation in Ukraine. Now I'm no linguist, but that sounds an awful lot like invasion to me. It's like calling a dumpster fire a spontaneous combustion event. Putin's grand plan, as far as anyone can tell, was to waltz into Kiev, replace the Ukrainian government with a puppet regime, and declare victory before tea time. There was just one tiny problem: the Ukrainians. Turns out they weren't too keen on being anyone's puppets, especially not Putin's. And so began what can only be described as a geopolitical dumpster fire of epic proportions. As Russia's special military operation quickly turned into a special military oopsie-daisy, the international community finally decided to wake up and smell the borscht. NATO, the world's most powerful military alliance, sprang into action, sort of. They started pumping weapons and aid into Ukraine like a barista on a double espresso shot. Now, before you picture NATO troops riding into battle on tanks with matching berets, hold your horses. Direct military intervention was a no-no, at least for now. The last thing anyone wanted was a full-blown war between Russia and NATO. That's like trying to break up a fight between two toddlers by joining in yourself. It's messy, it's loud, and nobody wins. So the Allies opted for a more cautious approach. Sanctions, sanctions, and more sanctions. They targeted everything from Russian oligarchs' yachts, because nothing says we mean business like seizing a billionaire's floating palace, to Russia's access to the SWIFT banking system, which is about as exciting as it sounds, but trust me, it's a big deal. Section 5, Mariupol, steel nerves, and a whole lot of rubble. As the war raged on, certain cities became synonymous with the brutality and resilience that defined the conflict. One such city was Mariupol, a strategic port city on the Sea of Azov. For months, Russian forces bombarded Mariupol with everything they had, turning the once vibrant city into a smoldering pile of rubble. But amidst the devastation, a story of extraordinary courage unfolded. Holed up in the sprawling Azovstal steel plant, a ragtag group of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians held out against overwhelming odds. They endured relentless shelling, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of death or capture. The siege of Mariupol became a symbol of Ukrainian resistance, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people fighting for their very existence. It was a stark reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can flicker in the most unexpected places. Section 6, Kherson. One moment you're in, the next you're out. Remember that whole taking back territory thing we talked about earlier? Well, Kherson was a prime example of Ukraine flipping the script. See, Russia had gone and declared Kherson as their own, like a kid claiming the playground slide after pushing someone off. But Ukraine, being the polite but firm folks they are, decided to take it back. And they did it in style. No dramatic last stands or desperate defenses here. Instead, they strategically pressured the Russian forces, chipping away at their defenses and supply lines until the Russians decided to pack up their tanks and go home. It was less of a fight, and more of a strategic withdrawal, like when you realize you've accidentally wandered into the wrong yoga class and decide to make a quiet exit. The recapture of Kherson was a major turning point in the war, proving that Ukraine could not only defend its territory, but also go on the offensive and reclaim what was lost. It was a much-needed morale boost for Ukraine, and a clear sign that Putin's grand plans were crumbling faster than a stale pierogi. Section 7, Bakhmut, the meat grinder that nobody won, except maybe the flies. While Kherson was a victory dance, Bakhmut was the painful hangover afterward. This city, once known for its salt mines and sparkling wine, became a desolate battleground where both sides poured in troops and resources with reckless abandon. It was like trying to win a staring contest with a brick wall, painful, pointless, and nobody really wins. For months, the battle raged on, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. The casualties were staggering, with thousands of soldiers on both sides losing their lives in the relentless fighting. Bakhmut became a grim symbol of the war's futility, a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. Even though Bakhmut eventually fell under Russian control, it was a Pyrrhic victory at best. The city was in ruins, and the cost in terms of manpower and resources was staggering. It was a victory that felt an awful lot like defeat. Section 8, Refugees and Aid. Because nobody wins when millions are displaced. While the soldiers were busy duking it out on the front lines, millions of ordinary Ukrainians were caught in the crossfire. Families were torn apart, homes were destroyed, and lives were turned upside down. It was a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Over 14 million people, that's more than the entire population of Belgium, were forced to flee their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring countries or internally displaced within Ukraine. They relied on the kindness of strangers, international aid organizations, and the generosity of countries that opened their borders to those in need. The outpouring of support for Ukraine was truly heartwarming. From everyday citizens donating what they could to governments sending billions in aid, the world came together to support the Ukrainian people in their hour of need. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity can shine through. Section 9. Mutiny in Moscow. When Wagner took a coffee break in Rostov. Just when you thought things couldn't get any weirder, hold on to your ushankas, because Russia decided to throw a curveball. Enter Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, a private military company with a reputation for being as subtle as a sledgehammer in a china shop. Prigozhin, who apparently skipped the playing nice with others chapter in his dictator handbook, decided he'd had enough of Russia's military leadership. So what did he do? He launched a full-blown mutiny, of course. Wagner troops marched on Moscow, even taking a little coffee break in Rostov-on-Don, just to show they meant business. It was like watching a season finale of House of Cards directed by Quentin Tarantino. Utterly bizarre, slightly terrifying, and impossible to look away from. The mutiny eventually fizzled out, with Prigozhin agreeing to go into exile, presumably to a life of luxury and borscht buffets, and his troops returning to base. But the damage was done. The mutiny exposed cracks in Putin's regime, showing that even within Russia, there was dissent and unrest. Section 10. New sheriff in town Ukraine gets a military makeover. Amidst all the chaos and carnage, Ukraine decided it was time for a change, a military makeover if you will. Out went Alexei Reznikov, the long-serving defense minister, and in came Rustem Umerov, a Crimean Tatar known for his negotiating skills and unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty. Now, changing your defense minister in the middle of a war is like trying to swap out a flat tire while driving down the highway. It's risky, it's messy, and you better hope you know what you're doing. But Ukraine was desperate for a shakeup, someone who could bring fresh ideas and a new perspective to the fight. Umerov's appointment was a sign that Ukraine was not just fighting for its survival, but also for its future. It was a signal that Ukraine was willing to adapt, to evolve, and to do whatever it took to win the war and rebuild its nation. Section 11. And the stalemate continues, but hey, at least it's not escalating yet. So here we are over 2.5 years into this geopolitical roller coaster ride, and where are we? Well, the front lines have largely solidified into a stalemate, with neither side able to make significant gains. It's a war of attrition now, a grim waiting game where victory will go to the side that can outlast the other. But even in the absence of major offensives, the fighting continues. Artillery duels light up the night sky, drones buzz overhead like angry mosquitoes, and soldiers on both sides face the daily threat of death or injury. It's a brutal, grinding conflict with no end in sight. The world watches with bated breath, hoping for a diplomatic solution, praying for an end to the bloodshed. But for now, the future of Ukraine remains uncertain, a tragic story still being written in blood and fire.